Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I have a special guest today, Michael Kahn. Guys, so I've known Michael for a while. We actually did the first ever live episode that I've ever done was a panel. It was at an event in Philly, and Michael was on the panel. So he is not a new guest, but this is the first time he and I are just doing a studio episode. So Michael, welcome to the show. How you doing, buddy?
Tom, it's great to be here. I am doing fantastic. It's a holiday week. We're recording this right before Thanksgiving. Weather's great. I'm super stoked.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about, so Michael came up with the title Links or Patties, How the Sausage is Made in Medical Affairs. So we're going to get into an awesome conversation about decision making and behind the scenes stuff in medical affairs. Before we do that, I want to first of all wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and holiday season. This might actually come out after Thanksgiving. So I want to wish you guys all a happy holiday season. As always, for those of you who are job seekers, um, definitely reach out if I can be of any help to you. I'm a recruiter by day, podcaster by night. I have to mention that because a lot of people are like, hey, I just thought you had a podcast. I didn't know what you did for a living. And also consider buying my book, Job Search Mastery: How to Win Your Dream Job, if you're on the market. The only reason I say this, not a shameless plug, but there's a lot of people on the market right now and they're looking for help. So I put everything that I know into that resource. It's available on Amazon. But before we get into even talking about this topic, Michael, do you want to do an introduction? Tell everybody who you are, where you're from, all that good stuff?
I would love to. Hello, world. I'm Michael Kahn. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for longer than I care to admit. My original background is medical communications, particularly scientific publications coming out of Northwestern, where I did my undergrad in journalism. Started my MBA about 10 years ago, and through that facilitated a transition into operations and then into medical excellence. I've been with Shire. I've been with Spark Therapeutics. I am currently a free agent looking for my next opportunity, and so it's great to be here, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. Awesome. It's going to be a great conversation. Let's start. I'd love to start with the title. You came up with the title Links or Patty. So like how does that relate to medical affairs and decision making and what goes on behind the scenes?
Right. So, the expression, let's find out how the sausage is made and go,
Yeah.
ooh, we kind of want to, don't go behind the scenes, just want to consume it. I think we all would benefit at every level from transparency and a window into decision making that others do that inevitably have an effect on us as stakeholders in any realm, sure, right? And so of course I was trying to be somewhat clever with the title about how sausage gets made, but I do believe, and we'll talk about this, that different decision making styles result in different decisions, i.e., links or patties. And so understanding, if you're, for the purposes of this audience, an MSL or an aspiring MSL, or even from another pocket of pharma, just understanding how leadership may go about making decisions may shed some light into what is happening at your organization, how it's happening, and how it's communicated, and the effects downstream of all that.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it because I think what happens is in medical affairs, we kind of see the polished results. We see what we're supposed to see, but what actually does go into making the sausage, into the decision-making processes and
Mhm.
the behind the scenes, what
Mhm.
actually does go into it?
Yeah, that's the $100,000 question, right? And I think it's important to start with the observation that at the higher levels of any organization, um, the decision making and the careful consideration of whether something is an opportunity or a problem or a question, it becomes more complex, and the proportion of the day spent on working through problems and essentially decision making becomes greater the higher up you go. The CEO setting a vision, talking with his or her direct reports, they're making decisions all day that impact the rest of the organization. And so the answer to that question is a long one, but I think it starts with the context of the decision that's being made, and the style of the organization. Is it small? Is it large? Is it a startup? Are there lots of layers? What industry are you in? Who are the stakeholders? To your point about being polished, complicated decisions that have a lot of consequences, things like starting or stopping development of an asset, massive organizational changes, restructuring, those really challenging, complex decisions that have a lot of um, effects on stakeholders and a lot of other effects. You push one button, another one comes up. Those decisions often come with a communication plan attached to them, and that's why they may seem polished, and sometimes, if unfortunately, overly so, a little bit rehearsed.
Mm.
But I also think that when you have authentic relationships one-on-one with your leaders, you can get sometimes, when it's appropriate, beyond the communication plan and the specific talking points, and hopefully, the real reasoning is reflected in those communication plans. We hope certainly that leadership isn't misleading teams and people when it's making decisions. But I think the polish comes from an associated communication plan. Here's the
Hmm.
decision, but here's the rationale that we intend to communicate behind it. The better a group, the better a team does with that, often the more acceptance a decision can result in.
There's also, from my experience, varying degrees of how good certain organizations are at making these decisions, who's making the decisions, and how effectively they're being implemented, and or how long it takes to make. There's just so much nuance to it. And it's not always just the size of the company. Sometimes it's just the leadership itself, like as who's making the strategic decisions, who's doing the tactical decisions, or is it the same, and how is it getting implemented, and how is it being successful? So the polish that we see sometimes is the result of maybe a much longer process or a much more messy process
Mhm.
than organizations that have it together. So I think what I'm left with is, where do you see some of the biggest disconnect between how decisions should be made versus how decisions are made?
That's a great question. If I think about that, I think the first thing I think of is, are organizations generally broadly succeeding in their decision making, and that probably varies.
Hmm.
It certainly, it varies in my experience, but I've been fortunate, mostly in my career to have been working under leadership teams that are careful and
Hmm.
reflective about it. Your point is very well taken that challenging large scale decisions, the ones that turn messy, often take a while, sometimes months, maybe a year in the case of, completely, for example, completely carving up a company and separating it into units. Those decisions are typically not made impulsively. So how should a decision be made? Depends on the nature of the problem or the issue. Some decisions probably require just one person going, this is the way we should do it. Others, more complex, getting the right people in the room and having the conversations, and I think having time to reflect on it. Now, that perspective is definitely informed by my experience in pharma. But if you change the lens entirely, and let me talk about a startup in tech, right? That maybe is launching fast. Let's say they're trying to maximize the value of an IPO. Have you heard the term blitz scaling? Right,
Hmm.
going from very little to massive productions. It's very fast decision making. Just
Hmm.
try something. If it doesn't work, pivot fast. But we're going to grow, 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 grow. That's a very different decision making style, and it probably contributes to the chaotic feel of some of those organizations. But that's probably culturally appropriate, and it's probably organizationally appropriate for that lens. So there's more than one way to quote unquote make the sausage, and so much of it depends on the size of the organization, the life cycle of the organization. Even a large organization that is newer, that is trying to get to market and beat competitors, may be more nimble in its decision making because they need to be more nimble in its execution. Whereas a larger, much more established, if I'm thinking about pharma, if I'm thinking about companies that have been around 50, 75, 100 years, there's a long going culture that evolves more slowly,
Hmm.
right? And so the decision making is likely to be probably more calculated, more longer term thinking, because the time for rapid growth is long past.
One of the first lessons I learned in pharma. So before I became a recruiter and I've been in this business almost 25 years. Before that, I spent 10 years as a rep and I was working in big pharma. And one of the first lessons I learned is that nothing happens quickly in pharma. Even some of the smaller organizations, things just take time. It's like turning the Titanic. So, and in my experience, I think a lot of that has to do with silos. So you have medical, clinical, commercial, regulatory, you have all the different groups operating in silos. How much of an impact does that have on the decision-making process and the speed at which decisions are made?
I believe, and this is my opinion only, the best decision making processes at that scale get all the relevant functions in the room and
Mm,
maybe plus a few to have honest conversations about how certain decisions are going to affect different stakeholders in the company. And let's not forget external to the company, especially patients.
mm,
One of the reasons I think that decision making takes so long in this industry, I believe that by and far, the vast majority of pharma companies are good, respectable, quality players. And I believe the bad apples are few and far between. And most companies by far want to do the right thing by their stakeholders, particularly patients. To do that when making large scale decisions takes time because these are not simple problems. They are often challenging problems that affect multiple stakeholders and therefore different functions are involved. And I think that's a challenge for some people, if particularly, and I'm definitely guilty of this earlier in my career, coming up through medical and not having a lot of exposure to different functions, thinking to myself, well, I don't understand this decision because it just torpedoes the medical affairs plan. But what I didn't have awareness of was how does it impact the other functions and the other stakeholders? How does it impact patients? Is it financially sustainable, right? Or would it kill the company? So there are lots of different variables beyond, in that case, my lens into medical. And it's the job ultimately of leadership to be able to assess those different stakeholders, those different functions, and make the decision that supports the company and its mission, ideally, the best. And sometimes that's not the best decision for an individual stakeholder or an individual function. And I think that's where challenging communication can come in from leadership level. And that's where
mm.
some of the frustrations can come in from functional contributors and leaders.
Can you share examples of how maybe you've seen collaboration amongst these silos have led to kind of breaking through this
Mhm,
glut of
mhm,
not poor decision, but maybe the glut of
mhm,
time it
mhm,
takes to make decisions and move
mhm.
things further and faster.
hmm I will preface this, and this applies to the Tom. You know what's coming. I will preface this, and this applies to the entire podcast by saying these observations are strictly my own. They don't
Yeah.
reflect any previous employer or any future employer. Certainly hope that's in the cards, right? So examples. I won't be specific, but a common organizational model in pharma is the asset team. It has different
Mm,
names, it has different acronyms, but what we're talking about, whether we're talking about a drug, a medicine, a therapy that's in development, i.e., an asset, or is already launched, bringing a group together around that asset. And I'll use, just for the purposes of example, a launched, marketed asset right? You're going to have commercial. They're probably leading the asset team. You're going to have medical. You may have regulatory if there are additional indications coming in. You'll have pharmacovigilance. You'll have probably finance. You'll have sales. And so a lot of different players at the table that are going to be frontline in, they're going to be the first to know when challenges to the asset that require thoughtful decision making come about. And
Hmm.
if those decisions can't be resolved in that asset team, or the asset team, or the question is so big that the asset team isn't empowered to make that decision, then they have to escalate it. But the best teams bring together teams cross functionally in an asset team. And that's how they break down the silos. There's already a constituted group of people who are working together and representing their functions for the good of the asset, for the good of the enterprise, right? And so when it comes to a difficult decision that's challenging, they will escalate it, but there's also a process for that. There's a presentation, there's thought put into the different perspectives, and it's raised probably to an executive level committee. This all sounds very formal, but I think it's a helpful window, particularly for field medical members who might be newer to industry, who haven't been exposed to how things typically work in the home office. That asset team cross-functionally is working together. They will see things. They will raise issues when need be, and then probably one or more meetings will take place, and thought given to all the different perspectives and questions and challenges that's raised. So the asset team model is I won't say it's universal, but it's been fairly standard everywhere I've been, because you need all of those views and expertise at the table when a group or an enterprise is challenged with an issue.
Yeah. All right. So let's unpack this a little bit. So you got
Yep.
a great leadership team. You have silos being broken down. You have collaboration and
Hmm.
silos are broken down. You have an
Hmm.
asset team, like you just
Hmm.
mentioned, and
Hmm.
there's strategic plans that are happening and things are
Hmm.
moving along. How big a part do internal politics come into play in organ? I'm not saying every organization, some organizations, just when it comes to this piece of,
Hmm.
decision making and forward progress.
Hmm. It can, and I think this is very organization dependent. I will say this: the best leaders I have worked with, and there have been plenty who do this, are well aware of the internal politics. And people mean different things, by the way, about internal politics. I define it as a construct of the individual relationships and values and commitments that one person might have to another, that essentially create potentially a competing value against that for the enterprise. There are other ways to label it. That's how I think about it. So a series of relationships that brings up issues that are not necessarily central to the enterprise's mission. The best leaders are very aware that internal politics are there, and they can put them aside for the betterment of the enterprise, saying this is the best decision for the patient, for the investor, for the enterprise, for long-term sustainability, whatever it is, they're looking for some final best interest, not necessarily, well, Tom, this works for you and me. You and I are going to go into a cigar smoke-filled room, and we're going to decide that this is the way to do it. We're just going to roll it out. I think I haven't seen that really.
Mm.
I'm sure it happens. I personally haven't seen it in my experience. I will make one observation about those silos and functions in smaller companies. If At companies that might have fewer than 100 people and are driving toward approval of a very first asset, you might not, the entire company might be the team. And so those are situations where the CEO, the CFO, other individuals might be very involved more in the day-to-day decision making than at larger organizations. That is by no means a criticism. Their involvement is critical to the success of the company, and they need to be there. So if I'm talking to, let's say, a publications leader, and they're wondering, why is the CEO like reviewing a manuscript? It's because the stakes are pretty high, but it's also incumbent upon that publication's leader to appropriately work with those senior leaders and explain the guardrails to do that compliantly, but recognize that the CEO ultimately has the enterprise's best interests in mind.
Yep.
Sometimes some education is needed there. But my point is that it varies, and who is at the table varies when we're talking about different sizes of organization. In my
I
experience,
agree
yeah, go ahead.
with that. I agree that in this situation, the size of the company matters. Um, but also how medical affairs centric is the organization. I've seen some
Mm,
organizations that are so commercially driven
hmm
that medical affairs is fighting such an uphill battle to be
hmm
heard
hmm
that
hmm
that becomes part of the stalemate, part of the slowdown of the process and the bottleneck of just kind of moving things forward, whether it's just decision making on implementation of initiatives, hiring, building, growing, expanding, whatever. That's a
hmm
piece of it that I see
hmm
um, as and on my side of the equation as a company that builds out medical affairs teams.
That happens, right? And different companies have different cultures and different. This is where politics plays in a little bit. I think about strong medical affairs departments, and in addition to having extremely strong strategic leaders and tactical functional leaders, they block and tackle well, right? Their med info systems are great, their publications plans are excellent, everything's around a strategy. That's table stakes.
Mm.
The strongest medical affairs organizations that truly have a seat at the table are the ones whose leaders are, for lack of a better word, charismatic. But they carry influence. They have
Hmm.
that credibility because they deliver to the organization. Insights are great at this. We've all talked about insights being the currency of medical affairs, and if a medical affairs leader at that cross-functional table can bring in insights, often raises the bar, particularly with commercial, to have influence at that decision-making level. Organizations vary, but organizations like MAPS,
Hmm.
which exists for the development of medical affairs professionals by definition, they are extremely engaged in developing medical affairs professionals' influence skills, their storytelling skills beyond the data, at the corporate level. The business domain of which I'm on, and the leadership domain, both of those domains are working on many activities to raise the level that medical affairs can influence at the leadership level. And I think we're starting to see generally in the industry medical affairs leadership being a cut above, and really having that influence. So I certainly have seen what you're talking about. I am optimistic and confident that that needle is moving to where medical affairs is becoming an equal player at the table and valued for what they bring, which is unique in the organization.
And it's gotten a lot better. I mean, it's we always, you hear this in all the conferences about the value proposition of medical affairs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just in the past 25 years, the needle has moved so far and it's a
hmm
much, the value has been accepted more widely. There's still that battle that happens and
hmm
that um, tug of war that's going on with commercial to a certain extent.
hmm
But when it comes, I'm going to go back to hiring because
Yeah.
obviously that's near and dear to me, hiring and building
hmm
out teams.
hmm
Um, what key factors should leaders prioritize when building, when in their building mode?
Fit, number one, two, and three on my list. And when I'm hiring for my team,
Mm,
there's a job description and there's a set of technical skills. Again, that's table stakes. I want to bring in somebody who is going to work extremely well with the team that's already there and perhaps make them better. And that's how I define fit.
Okay.
And I've heard it, the best leaders I've heard that from too. And I think that's where the panel interview really shines because individuals on a given leadership team can then come back and debrief on a candidate and start to talk about the decision whether to move forward with somebody comes down to, in my experience, less about the skills than do they fit? Can we see this person working here? Are they going to add to us? Are they going to make us better? Do they fill a gap? Is it potentially redundant? For aspiring MSLs in particular, I think beyond being able to credibly and compellingly communicate data, having one or two particularly special skills to add to the team can really, in some cases, improve fit. Whether that's technology, can you code? Can you build a cool tool? Are you particularly good with finance? Can you sit in on budgets? That kind of thing. So whatever additional pieces an aspiring MSL can add can really enhance fit. And sometimes in interviewing MSLs, I look at those and then I bring that back to the MSL leader and say, this person, they've got A and they present beautifully, but this thing about B makes them really interesting fit. I also remember when I was hiring one of my final roles for my operations team, leaning towards somebody. We had a couple of good candidates, but one had a particular skill set that nobody else in the candidate pool had. No, I'm sorry, not in that nobody else in my existing team had. And that was like fit. It was like, okay, they're adding something, and it wasn't in the job description,
Hmm.
but it was so useful from a fit perspective because they would make everybody on my team better, and so that was like a fit bonus for me.
And I think that's actually really good advice because I think a lot of people that are interviewing are trying to stand out. They're trying to figure
Mhm,
out how do I become the person that ultimately gets this job. So think about
mhm,
that fit. How do you show that you're a fit? Well, you have to learn
mhm,
about the organization. You have to do well on the interview. You have to be inquisitive on the interview. You have to know
mhm,
about the players
mhm,
and the
mhm,
goals.
mhm,
So assess how, like you said, how are you going to be valuable to that organization and how can you
mhm.
show that you're a fit? So
Yeah,
easier
and I
said
think
than
if I
done,
can,
but
yeah. So just to bluntly interrupt there, be well-rounded
yeah,
is always good advice. We spend and AI and ATS tracking systems haven't done us any favors in this regard because we're trying to make ourselves fit the exact role that's published. And be well-rounded kind of contradicts that a little bit, but I still think it's good advice because you never know when that side talent or skill is going to be the thing that makes you stand out and
right.
makes you human, which I think when it comes to interviewing and one-on-ones and establishing fit, the human perspective is the one thing that stands out above all.
And getting back to the sausage being made and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
some of the challenges and messiness of it, how do you make difficult personnel decisions? Not just like terminations
Hmm.
and performance issues, but
Hmm.
also promotions
Hmm.
and acknowledgments of
Hmm.
a team member.
Hmm.
Um, can you talk about that a little bit?
I absolutely can, because I think, particularly at the introductory lower levels of medical affairs organizations, there isn't that level of transparency in how those decisions are made. And so I do think a window into that is helpful. I think the most common process for promotions is a leadership team will get together and be asked if you have anybody on your team who you think is deserving of a promotion, bring some supportive information to a meeting and we'll talk about it. And that's where the supervisor will get some open feedback on that person and hopefully if the promotion is going to happen find out that that person is supporting and being an outstanding partner and delivering excellence to multiple stakeholders. It is not just about the supervisor employee relationship. And that stage is set well in advance of the performance review or the merit review, often by months. And so promotions just don't happen in a vacuum because somebody says yes. There's feedback involved, there's careful thought, not just about the person, but about the organization and about the role. And the best advice I can give somebody who wants a promotion and wants to influence the decision is to broaden the role and get the company dependent on a role whose behaviors and expectations are above what it actually is. Because if you're drawing an organization from scratch, you're not thinking about the people. You're developing the role, and you're deciding whether something is a senior director or a manager, et cetera. There's a set of expectations about experience levels, about behaviors, about strategic thinking, et cetera, et cetera. If you can over deliver in that role, and the
Mm,
company is now depending on it, then you've made the case essentially for a revision to the structure. And that's the most effective way I've seen for title and associated salary and bonus increases, is to be so good at your job that you've actually expanded the role and made it critical to the company. So I think so that's about the good side of it. The bad side of it, obviously, if you're talking about termination of an employee, HR is involved. Discussions, feedback, performance improvement plans. It's a very careful process, usually. It's not something we like to talk about, but most of us have seen it happen. It's uncomfortable, but it's usually thought out.
mm,
And it's usually carefully constructed. And in my extremely limited experience, it's been done compassionately.
mm. Good advice. And one thing I want to point out is to be undeniable is basically what you're saying in a nutshell. And I've talked about that a lot on this podcast. When you're so good that it becomes so obvious to everyone involved that you're deserving of it, then that's when the promotions happen. But getting back to the decision-making process, what's one unspoken truth that exists in pharma and biotech as it relates to this?
Unspoken truth. The first one that comes to mind is what I just said around promotions, that there's group input
Mm,
into an individual's performance beyond just the supervisor. Um, the best performance reviews involve stakeholder feedback, right? I think we've all seen that. That's fairly standard nowadays. Promotions go beyond that. You're actively soliciting examples where somebody's gone above and beyond and has depended on it. I think the unspoken truth, particularly as the decisions get complex, is how many meetings and how much time is spent talking through things, analyzing things. Um, I've been fortunate that I can count on just a few fingers how many decisions, from my limited perspective, I thought were being made impulsively. Most decisions are the result of a great deal of forethought, a lot of time, a lot of people, a lot of care. Doesn't mean we always like the results. It doesn't mean we think that the results are best for the function, but they're not impulsive. And so I think the unspoken truth is how much time is taken in pharma, and particularly because the stakes are so high,
mm.
because nobody wants to do something that is wrong by physicians and patients. The decision making, in my experience, is very careful, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is number one, great advice, great insights. And it makes me want to eat sausage. Like I feel like I need to go have breakfast somewhere and get myself
Uh-huh.
some so I guess the last question is links or patties for you. What do you go with?
I will go with either. Now, if so, my wife is all about sausage patties, particularly on her pizza. She will, if we're going to a new pizza place, she will frankly interrogate
I
the
love it.
waiter, the server, and say, "Your sausage, is it the crumbly kind?" Is it like she's very
Yeah.
particular. I can go either way. I'm much more interested in the seasoning and the flavor profile. I
I'm
like
an
the good
equal
stuff. I
opportunity
like the good
sausage guy
stuff.
myself.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you for your insights. Thanks for coming on. This was great. A really interesting conversation. We never really talked about this specifically as we have, this whole decision-making process. So, thanks for shedding light. Thanks for coming on.
My
Appreciate it.
pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I had fun.
Good man. Guys, as always, thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing this with friends. If you got value in this, please share it with others. And as I said before, and as Michael said, happy holidays to you all. Love you guys. We'll see you next time.